On December 8th, 1941, the forces of the Japanese Navy and Air Force attacked the American fleet at Pearl Harbor, and World War II began for the United States. This event is known in this country as a Day of Infamy, and there's been much debate later on as to just what kind of war this really was. Was it one of naked aggression, of global conquest by the Japanese? Was it one of competing imperialisms? Was it one in which Japan was playing by the West's rules of the late 19th century? After all, what were the Americans doing out there in the middle of the Pacific Ocean? But that's not our issue today. Our issue today is what this war did to China. One thing we know is that this war, like all wars, had inadvertent consequences that could not have been foreseen at the time. Take the United States. The United States would begin the buildup of a military-industrial establishment that would never truly be demobilized after this war. The United States also emerged as something it had not been in any serious way before. We became a permanent Pacific power. And we would never truly disengage from the Pacific or from Asia. And the Americans would fight 2 more Asian wars over the course of the next 3 decades. And of course, the United States still has troops in Asia, in Korea, as a residue from the Korean War of 1950 to 1953. This war also brought the United States suddenly into the midst of Chinese domestic politics in a matter in which we are still involved between the nationalists, now on Taiwan, and the communists who, since 1949, have controlled the mainland. But our focus here again is what this war did to China. And here, when we say the war, we simply don't mean the war that began with the bombing of Pearl Harbor. That attack only marked the moment when the Americans entered the war, and when the World War would begin in earnest. China had already been at war with Japan for over 4 years, and indeed had been preparing for war with Japan since 1931, when Japan seized China's northeastern provinces and installed Henry Pui, the last emperor, as the leader of the puppet state of Manchukuo. Think of how China looked in 1937. The national government was internationally recognized as the legitimate government of all China. It had many problems and weaknesses, but had also a string of major successes: the establishment of China's first national currency, the regaining of sovereignty over customs and tariffs, the recruitment and training of a new central army. And no one in 1937 could have imagined what the next 13 years would bring. At that time, the idea that it could bring a communist conquest of China, or what Chinese communist leaders would later call China's liberation, was simply inconceivable. This was a stunning surprise, even to communist leaders. Communist victory was by no means inevitable. I don't believe in historical inevitability. In the case of the Chinese communist victory, it can really be argued that if 1 or 2 battles in northeast China had turned out differently in 1948, the capital of that country would still be Nanjing. But if we reject inevitability, we do have to understand the circumstances under which the Chinese Communist Party came to power, the factors that made it possible, not inevitable, but possible for them to win. And these have a great deal to do with the war and the consequences of the war.